You're listening to the Total Music Business Podcast, brought to you by Puzzle Maker Academy. Here's what happens when you think outside the box. It's time to navigate the music industry with confidence with your hosts, Denny McMahon and Andrea Succi.
Welcome to the very first episode of the Total Music Business Podcast. I am one half of your hosts, Andrea Succi, and I have here the other half, Danny McMahon.
Hey,
Danny,
man.
how's it going?
I'm good, bro. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Very excited to get this show on the road and to get started.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's actually happening. It's all that sort of those sort of thoughts and procrastination and whatever else it is before you actually bring this into a reality is, as I say, finally a thing. So I'm excited. I'm pumped, and gonna have some really special guests over the coming months. So let's rock and roll.
That's it, absolutely. So we're gonna start every one of these episodes with what we call the release recommendation. So we're gonna give you guys a little tip for what you should go and listen to over the course of the month and what we found over the last month. So Danny, would you like to give us the first release recommendation?
Yeah, man. I'm going to sort of like break it down a little bit really on my one. I've discovered recently there's one on Spotify as well, but I've been sort of like making my way through Apple Music because their playlists are getting a bit hotter. And I've discovered one basically which is Australian country music, which is sort of a little bit obscure, a little bit different, but it's called Aussie Country. And I've discovered like three like incredible songs on it. There's one by a girl called Kaylee Bell, a song called That Summer, which is really cool. Production's amazing, and she's done that as a duet with a guy called Josh Miranda, who's coming through. He's a big writer in Nashville, and he's coming through at the moment. This is the one that I'm really, really in love with. It's a song called No Breaks by the Wolf Brothers. It's an absolute banger. Like if you want something to wind your windows down and drive through in the 3 days of nice weather that we have here in the UK, then that would be a good one for you. And then my last one that I'm absolutely loving is one by Jane Denham, I think you pronounce it, and that's with a guy called Troy Kemp, so another duet which seems to be really big in the country scene at the moment, and that is a song called Hung Up on You. And again, it's sort of like that really feel good, even though it's sort of like a heartbreak song, it's kind of got this really feel good vibe in with it. So lots of emotions flying around the place with that one. But those are the three that I would suggest, and that playlist as a whole is pretty hot.
That's amazing. I actually haven't heard any of those, so I'll go and check them out. And my release recommendation is actually an NCR, which is a non-country related one for this month, and it's This Is Heaven by Nick Jonas.
Banger, yeah.
It's from his latest album, Spaceman, came out the start of this month, which would be March 2021. And it was produced by Greg Kurstin and mixed by Serban Gene, who is arguably the biggest mixer at the moment in pop music. And I love the fact that it's got this sort of mid-tempo driving beat like throughout the whole thing, and they establish it as soon as they get into the track, and it's just particularly cool for any producers out there. It's like the addition of this doubled kick that they put in, so basically it sort of goes like pum ka pum ka, like throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, creating a groove, love it.
Yeah, so that like it basically adds this kind of like heartbeat feel to it.
Yeah.
So they're establishing the 4 on the floor, but then adding that, it just seems like that the track's like always like anticipating what's coming next. And so I thought that was really cool. It's got a really cool summery vibe, and I'm also hearing strong like 90s disco influences.
I'm here. There's a lot of kind of that 90s recontextualization thing going through. Obviously, we had the big sort of like 80s thing, sort of like when 1975 broke through and bands like that. I was hearing a lot more of that. The 90s starting to come back around a little bit. It's a big thing in the country scene as well at the moment. There's a lot of that 90s country revival thing.
Yeah, definitely
going around at the moment as well. So I'm hearing that all through sort of contemporary music. Really is. I feel like the 90s revamp is going to be a thing over the next few months for sure.
Yeah, definitely looks like it. So make sure you guys go and check out these new releases, and obviously let us know if you want to add, if you have anything to add, let us know on our socials. Just hit us up and just let us know what you guys are listening to. But let's get into the main topic for today. We have a wonderful guest. I'm going to let Danny introduce the guest and take it away.
Yeah, so ladies and gents, it's time for the main attraction, as it were. So we've got a very special guest on today. We have the wonderful Marcus Keppel-Palmer. He's an experienced music lawyer and now runs a legal service at the University of the West of England, where he teaches entertainment law. So he's a very experienced individual. He's got loads of cool backstories, so hopefully tell us, and we're going to bring him in. Marcus, how's it going, bro?
It's all right. It's all right. You make me sound very old. All this, I can remember the 90s first time round.
How were the 90s first time round? Because I was barely alive, so talk me through it.
Well, I mean, it was, of course, the time of acid rave and stuff like that. So
you sound experienced.
Glow sticks and no, of course, I was behind a desk, trapped behind a desk, working hard, as you well know.
Yes, indeed.
Like
Indeed. That do you know what? That literally leads me perfectly onto my first question, really, because I've never asked you this. I've known you've kind of like supported me through my the entirety of my career, and I've never asked you this question. And it's always something that I've wondered, and I never got around to asking it to you. And for me, it's like, how does someone like yourself, how do you get started in something that's like as niche as music law? Like, how does that happen? Like, is there a particular story, a particular series of events?
It's interesting because I was just asked to reflect on this just a couple of days ago, and it's never really been very clear to me how anything happens. But I loved growing up with music, as I guess anybody who has work in the music industry does. And so I was, a big fan, would read all the music papers, music press and stuff like that. And so from sort of early teens, I gradually got into doing things that might be seen to be music industry stuff. So I volunteered at a BBC local radio station. Ha ha.
Love that. Yeah.
That was good. That was good fun. Rocking up in Kent to Radio Medway, as it was, at sort of 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening for the local show. So that was fun. It was the time of punk, so it was a lot of do-it-yourself stuff. So I used to write for a fanzine. Formed a band. Got involved in putting on gigs and doing some DJing, and from that, basically through connections, I got to work in a record company, and so I was doing work in a record company, then doing a law degree at the same time, and somehow they just sort of merged together. And when I became a lawyer, I was practicing up in Liverpool as a solicitor. And Liverpool is a sort of micro scene in itself, particularly in the 80s. There were bands like Echo and the Bunnymen and OMD, and you're looking blankly at me as going, who are these 80s bands that were massive then?
I know a couple of them. As I say, like, the 80s was like, for us, the 80s is such a big time for pop production. So like, a lot of these sort of like more obscure 80s bands, I've kind of ventured into it a little bit, so kind of understand the importance that they hold in UK music culture anyway.
Obscure. I'll take you off on that and take you outside and give you a rap across the knuckles for that. But what that meant was that Liverpool bands tended to gather together, and they were somewhat skeptical of the sort of the London music scene. So they didn't want to go to London to get advice and stuff like that. And so if you happen to be in that scene and be a lawyer, it was pretty fertile ground to get clients and to do advice and stuff like that. So from the mid 80s right the way through to the end of the decade, I guess I was doing a lot of music business advice up there, acting for people who put together studios, bands, artists, and it was a great time, but it was more of a niche, as you say. And then when I moved down to Bristol, I've just sort of been going on. When I moved into the university, I thought, well, it's such a problem for a lot of people, and it's that sort of Liverpool scene, microcosm going on. It's really expensive to go to London, and that was where the entertainment lawyers were all based. And if you are somebody just starting out, unless the record company is going to pay your bills, where are you going to get any advice? So I thought it would be, a good idea. I don't know whether it is actually panned out as being a good idea, but it'd be a good idea to set up something that benefits the students who are learning, and also perhaps gives opportunity for people who are starting out to get some, quality legal advice and to find out a little bit more about what's going on. Because unfortunately, as you well know by now, the music industry is 90% industry and 10% music.
Amen.
Oh
yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, that's where, like, having someone like yourself, as I say, I've referred to you before as sort of like it's almost become like a mentor role that you've ended up playing in my career, because you kind of, every time something's been there, I've had that amazing experience to be able to turn to you and be like, Marcus, I think I might be in a bit of trouble here. Yeah, to put it lightly, can you help me out with this, or this person, I don't, it doesn't quite feel right, and and as I say, being able to have that relationship with someone like yourself for me has been absolutely a necessity. And I would say that to any of the guys listening in, especially the guys who are sort of like following us through on the course. I'd say that's really, really important to kind of have that figure who whether it's a legal person, whether it's someone who's just had experience in the industry, whether that be a family member, whether that be whatever, so somebody who's there to help guide you and understand you, and that's invested in what you're doing, is so important. I feel.
Generally having like a mentor there, basically, like whoever that may be, and whichever role they'll take, it's just good to have them there.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting that you mentioned that kind of role that they take, because obviously everyone sees it from a different perspective, and that kind of leads me on perfectly to my next question. So when you're sitting down with an artist, because as I say, when I look at a contract, or one of our artists brings a contract to us that involves publishing, obviously I look at it from a songwriter perspective. I'm kind of looking at things like, as I say, how's that gonna as always, how's that going to help make your business profitable? How's that going to be a useful source of income for you moving forward? How's that going to as I say, generate your profile? But for you, obviously, when you're sitting down with an artist and they bring you a contract for the first time, what are like the key areas that you're looking for in a contract when they bring it to you for the very first time?
I mean, everyone's got a different set of wishes that they want out of what's going on, and everyone's got a different context. So you've got to say, what do I as an artist, or what do I as a songwriter, or what do I as a record company want from this? And do I want to go to the wall on every point, or do I just want to use this as a taster to get a relationship going, or something of that nature? So to that extent, you've got to say, let's be flexible about what a contract is. A contract is just something that's on paper. It's something that can be negotiated. It's not the be all and end all. But once it's signed, at least it's evidence of what that relationship is supposed to be. So I think the key things are, how long is it going to be lasting for? What's the money? What's the position about the rights? And what's going to happen when the contract comes to an end? And those, I think, are the four key aspects that you need to look at in each of the contracts that you come up with. And as I say, some of those aspects might not be so important, but it's been really clear, if anyone's read anything up in the past 10 years or so, that nobody, perhaps in the 70s, certainly not before the 70s, but nobody in the 70s really gave much consideration about how long the rights last. And of course, they've been extended and extended and extended, which effectively means that a successful song can keep you for a pretty long time in terms of money coming in. And if you're going to give that away for pretty low returns, you're effectively giving away the crown jewels at that. So just because that was the standard at the time didn't make it right.
Yep.
And now we've got a load of people saying, I want to get my songs back. I want to terminate this. And you were talking about 90s revivals in terms of the music to be getting through. I've been listening to Dwight Yoakam.
Yeah.
And Dwight is currently in a big dispute over the first albums that he's done, because in America, you can give notice as a performer to get your copyrights back in recordings after 35 years. He served notice, the record company's disputed it, and the record company has basically pulled those recordings from streaming services, downloads, they're no longer available. So neither party is making any money out of classic early Dwight Yoakam at the moment.
Right, yeah.
And it's just an impasse, and that's the kind of thing that nobody really expected when he first signed the contracts back in, 1984, I'm going to say.
Yeah,
but,
this is it. I guess kind of like what you're saying is, you made that fourth point. It's kind of like almost, the first thing you got to kind of establish is what's the divorce going to look like before the marriage. Almost, it's kind of the thing, isn't it? Yeah, that's kind of like the most fundamental, important element of it.
Yeah, and you've got to think to yourself, no relationship with a company is probably going to last forever.
No.
So how long do you realistically think it's going to be making money from that relationship? It's probably going to be 3 to 5 years maximum.
Yeah.
So why tie up the rights beyond that?
Yeah, and I think that's really important, as I say, with like musicians and stuff as well. A lot of them don't kind of have that sort of like sense. You've got to have a lot of kind of sense of, self-worth. And I think a lot of people really struggle with that because it's such a struggle to get to that point where you're, doing when you get into something like a publishing deal, but actually understanding that kind of like, oh yeah, things are starting to change for me. I kind of am in that position where I'm starting to, generate an income, and this is actually starting to happen for me. You kind of like, as I say, we say it all the time, get into that mindset. It kind of has to change in that. For me, from my experience, it needs to change in that moment, and sort of like be, oh yeah, no, actually, I do have value, and the first deal isn't necessarily the best one. I think that is really, really important. You've said that to me so many times. Just because this is the first deal that's coming in, don't get excited and don't be like, oh, someone actually likes me, and sort of have that. You've got to have that real sense of, okay, we've got to be smart with this and see it, literally and logically, which a lot of creative people struggle with.
Yeah.
So yeah. That would be the one for me, from a musician's perspective, would be my little tip on that one.
I'd like to just reiterate before we move on to the next question, just the very first thing that Marcus said when he answered this question about sitting down with an artist and what the main areas are that you look at the contract. And Marcus said, really make sure that you know what you want as an artist. So I think that's, going back to the concept of the mentor and choosing your mentor and choosing who you're going to have to represent you and to work with you. That's brilliant for me. Like the fact that you need to find people who are going to be there completely on your side. And, the fact that, like Marcus said, the first thing that I say is, I sit down and say, what do you want? What's the thing that you want it, rather 100%. Than just going through the contract and saying, yeah, this contract's good, you can sign it, cool. Go ahead, sign it. Or like, no, this contract's rubbish. Don't, move on to the next one. It's like, let's get to the best possible version of this, bearing in mind what your core values and what your objectives are. And I think that's absolutely fundamental when you're looking for the right mentor.
Yeah, almost taking the human element of it into consideration as
Absolutely.
well, without you losing the logic which you've got to have. But I totally get what you're saying. And, Marcus, you've always been great with me with that. When we sat down, you kind of go, well, what is it that you're after? What's your goals? What's your ambitions? And being able to sort of like establish it that way, I think is really, really important. My next question to you, Marcus, any horror stories that you can share with our audience? Do you have any?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things is people have to remember that if you sign a contract, you sign a contract.
Yeah,
and you're actually bound by it. And I'm going to go back to the 80s because it's long enough ago and we can remember it. But this band that I was working with, they'd signed a contract, which gave them an advance if they delivered their first album within, I think it was 6 months, but I can't remember the precise details. But effectively, it wasn't long after signing the contract. Well, they were 4 years down the line, and they still hadn't. They hadn't delivered anything. And they kept wondering why they weren't getting the next stage of the advance.
Oh my days.
They thought that it was coming every 6 months or whatever else it was like
and
that.
It just wasn't arriving at all. And
no, and of course, what you had then was massive tension, because the manager of the band was saying, "You've got to get into the studios and record, because otherwise we've got no money." Because back in those days, of course, recording and royalties was actually a major part of income as opposed to touring. So you've seen that change going on there. But the lead singer and main songwriter was such a perfectionist, and said, I'm basically not happy with anything. I can't deal with this studio. I can't deal with this. That guitar is out. I can't record anything for a month, and it was just prima donna time going on.
100%. That I've seen that so many times. That kind of like that over perfectionist thing is sometimes you just gotta, as I say to the guys here, like you've got to just trust the process sometimes, because say that's a perfect example of it. Coming and biting you in the backside effectively.
Yeah. So ultimately, what happened was the guitarist smuggled out the tapes that they were from the studio, dropped them at the middle of the night to the manager, who drove them down to the record company, who released a single from it.
No way!
Which then threw the lead singer into such a paddy that he basically sacked everybody else.
Wow! Cool, that is mad. So, yeah.
It was a bit of a mad time. Thankfully, all I was involved in was every 6 or 9 months going, "You're not getting the money because the contract says you haven't done what you were sent to do." And no matter how many times I've said that, they didn't really ever listen. But hey ho.
Yeah.
That was a good one. You say what a disasters. We're in a DIY era, aren't we?
Yeah,
and
very much
because
so.
Because of the internet, any Tom, Jared, or Jay can set up their own production company or record label or whatever else it is like that. And the first thing they do is they go, "I'm going to go on the internet and Google record contracts or Google publishing contracts."
Yeah.
And so they download this load of stuff, which means nothing to them. Most of it comes from either India or America, and they're sitting in their bedsit in Camden Town. You presented with this thing that means absolutely nothing because it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you say, "Well, hang on."
Yeah, this isn't working. Yeah,
what's going on
nonsensical.
There? Yeah. By which time they've signed somebody to it, and you just think, "Oh no,
it's not.
I don't want to be here when this all goes wrong."
Oh dear. Oh yeah, but I know exactly what you mean. Like, as I say, it comes up time and time again. This whole kind of like people not structuring what they're doing properly. And it comes up, far too frequently, unfortunately, in this industry. So, from an artist perspective, you got to be careful and you got to be wary of it for sure. All right, so I guess that leads me on to my final question.
Okay.
Where can artists get legal advice?
Okay, well, obviously from the internet.
Brilliant.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Yeah. Okay. So let's not diss everything on the internet. If you are fairly judicious about it, there's a lot of good advice that you can get from the internet. There's some good stuff. Mostly, I have to say, it's American, but that's not a problem, because the issues that come up in contracts in America and the UK are pretty similar. And so, if you can find out your way through some of the terminology, understand things around royalties, advances, rights, stuff like that from that information, you're in a better position than not knowing anything about it.
Yeah.
In addition to that, there's some pretty good advice groups on things like Facebook that you can go on to. I mean, I want to say a big up to my friend Dave Mindell, who set up something called Music Advice Exchange on Facebook. It's a group that is there to give, free guidance to songwriters, performers, people. And people like Mindell, who've been around since the 1970s as a songwriter, have got a wealth of experience. You've got people like Dave Knopfler from Dire Straits on there, Alex Lark, who's represented UK Eurovision. There's plenty of good advice that you can get from some of those groups. So I would definitely say if you can find a group like that, join it. And people are really good about helping each other, and particularly if you're just starting out, provided you don't, as it were, take the Michael out of it and try and ask too much, but just get some advice. That's really good. In terms of legal advice, then, I would say the Musicians Union, if you're a member of the Musicians Union, they've got a good link into advice services. I think you get 30 minutes free advice through some of their people, which is good. If you're a member of PRS or PPL, again, there's a sort of free advice service. Again, it's quite limited, but you can link into that. And in addition to that, if you can find a good music lawyer, go for it. Some of them are actually obviously quite expensive. Most of them are based in London, but if you can find a good one, and you can work with them, that is always good. I would say there may be the odd free legal advice service, like the one that I run, that's around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plug away.
Recommend
it to anyone.
I'm sure details of it will be somewhere in the podcast later on. But
yeah, we'll put it in the show notes for our listeners.
Yeah, hidden right at the bottom. Thank you. But yes, I mean, certainly, I think that's that. And don't forget, legal advice isn't just the only type of professional advice you should take. Accounting advice is really important as well, and so you need to find a good accountant who also knows and understands the industry as much as possible. So there are those things. Of course, a load of people now get information about this from courses and stuff like that. And so I really recommend, if you can find a good course, either a specific one that is giving you like an introduction to the music industry, or of course, if you sign up for a degree course at some universities, they will give you good advice as well. So, I think there's plenty of sources. Of course, it takes time to look for all of that stuff. So that's where, if you can find a good mentor who knows some of this stuff,
yes, absolutely,
that's good for you as well. But
absolutely,
I think you've always got to remember, if you're working in the music business, working in the music industry, your goal is to get your music out there, but you have to know what the business is all about.
Yeah, I think so. I think more so now than ever, really. I guess sort of when you talk when we were in that DIY world, I think you're obviously long gone are the days where labels were sort of like investing in artists from a very early stage. It's kind of like they more sort of like invest in something that's hot and that's working, and that's something that's almost a profitable business in this day and age. It's probably also worth mentioning, Marcus, as well. Like when labels and publishers come around, the bigger ones. If there's anybody listening who is in that particular scenario, a lot of the time, you can get you negotiate for the labels to pay those legal fees for you, because they want you to be properly represented as well.
Yes, and that's really key about that, because labels want to make sure that you take advice on their contracts before signing it, and the way that they can do that is effectively to support you by paying for you to go to a lawyer. Make sure it's a lawyer that is independent of the label.
Yes,
don't rely on the label's lawyer. That's not good.
Yeah, very, very important stuff. All right, well, Drea, I'm going to pass that on to you. Thank you so much for those, Marcus. And Andrea's going to just hit you up with some cool little questions, I think, right about now.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we are going to end every episode with a series of quick fire questions to just get a little bit more into the character of our guests and see some sort of more behind the scenes stuff. So my very first question for you is, what is your desert island disc?
My desert island disc is "Boys of Summer" by Don Henley.
Yes, love that. One of my favorites as well.
Yeah, I love how committed you were to that straight away. That's brilliant.
Well,
yeah.
That's my steering wheel drums song as well.
Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the first concert you attended?
The first concert I ever attended was David Bowie, 1970, whatever it was, when he retired Ziggy Stardust.
Amazing. Wow.
Mine was Snoop Dogg, so you've beat me on that one.
Gin and juice, man. Gin and juice.
Love it.
That's brilliant. What are you reading currently? And what is the one book you would recommend to our audience? So,
okay. I'm currently reading. Well, I read about 6 books at one time, unfortunately. So,
okay, what's your favorite out of the 6?
All right. In the bathroom, I read Hamburg. It's a story of the bands when they went to, so it's the Beatles and their era and the time that they were in Hamburg and all the stories about the clubs that set up there, the Star Club, the Top 10 Club. It's a really good oral history of that time, and I'm finding it fascinating, particularly as I used to live in Hamburg, and when I worked for a record company, I lived and worked in Hamburg at the time, so I find that is really interesting. In my bedroom, I'm actually reading some crime novels, so
oh, great,
I'll leave them like that.
Yeah.
What's a desert island book?
Yeah.
Good question. Give me a minute to think
That's
about.
That's okay. We can come back to that one. So the next one is: do you have a quote you live your life by or think of often?
That's a tough one. No, I don't. No, I don't. I quite like Carpe Diem. So seize the day. But my version of that is basically always say yes.
Yeah, I love that.
So if somebody says something to you, say yes, because who knows where it's going to lead to.
Absolutely, yeah. I've actually, recently gone through a very similar process of like realizing the amount of times that I would put up obstacles or things in my mind, before saying yes to things and thinking, I can't do that, I haven't got time to do that, or like, I need to work, no, I can't. It's just like, say yes and figure it out, and and usually then it leads to the best experiences that you'll have in your life. So yeah, I absolutely relate to that.
Okay.
Have we got a book in the meantime, or shall I carry on?
All right. I'm going to go with 10 books. It's called Arms for Oblivion. It's by a guy called Simon Raven. He wrote the books in the 60s and 70s, and it's a story, a sort of roman à clef, about a load of people who grew up after the war. And they were based on real people who were high up in politics and things like that. It's a load of fun. It's quite scandalous stuff. And I tend to read these 10 books about every 5 years. So
that's brilliant.
It's
sounds
good
like
fun.
juicy stuff.
I'll go with that if I'm allowed to take that with me.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So you have become quite the bridge expert with your bridge recommendations on Facebook over lockdown. So my question for you is, what is the first bridge that you want to visit as soon as we're allowed to travel again?
Oh, okay. I would like to, because I've never been there, Iron Bridge in Shropshire near Telford. Okay, it's a classic bridge. It's the very first major iron bridge. It's not far away. It's near Shrewsbury, so why not go for that?
Absolutely. And just to give a little bit more context for our audience, Marcus was posting, how many was it? Was it one a day?
Well, it got up to 4 a day during
Four a
lockdown 1, but has dribbled along ever since. I think we've got to about 580 bridges with stories behind them. So either they're architecturally fun, or they've got a fun story, or they're just mind blowing because they're set in a great set of scenes. I mean, there's some fantastic bridges that just bridge massive great gorges, and you think, how on earth have they ever built that? Have they got it to meet in the middle?
Absolutely, yeah. It was really fascinating to see them all, and of course when you were posting some of the Italian ones, I was quite proud. And yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. So then, still remaining in the lockdown theme, what have you learned? Any new skills you have learned during lockdown?
Yes, I've learned how to do Zoom.
Yeah,
haven't we all? Oh god, if there was ever a more relevant sentence.
I really wish I'd invested in Zoom early on.
I've done a course on classical music at Yale University.
Amazing.
I've done a course on history of art at Berkeley University, which is really good. I do radio shows for a local community radio station. So if you're listening to this somewhere else, it's probably not relevant to you. But of course, instead of being live, they've all been pre-recorded. So I've learned how to do some of that stuff and get it sounding not totally awful, but not nearly as good as anything that you guys can do.
No, I think that's been the case for a lot of people. That now so many people have little home setups, USB mics and dabbling with interfaces and Logic, GarageBand, and getting into home recording and streaming and everything. And if anything, that's actually a really good thing, because out of this, it means that more artists now are learning about how to get really good sound over the internet, and so that will only then carry on and just be a really good thing once we get out of lockdown.
100%. I think circumstance is so important in as I say, in anything really. It sort of kind of forces you into those uncomfortable situations, which makes you kind of as I say, as I put you in that position where you have to do it. Otherwise you sink, which is cool, as you say, like in terms of streaming and stuff, and the sound quality in a lot of them is vastly improved over this period of time, because as I say, we can't go out and gig, so we can put into that situation, and I think that's been really cool. One of the pluses for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And so final question is, do you have any ask or request for our audience, or any parting words?
Well, can I just say, as well as saying just say yes, can I always say, before you do anything in the music business, put it in writing. So I don't know whether that's an ask for the audience or a piece of advice or whatever, but don't just go and write a song with somebody. Get it in writing as to who owns what and what the splits are before then. Just absolutely, that's what you should live your life by.
Definitely. I agree.
I think that's the other thing I would say is, be open to listening to as much different music from as many different genres as you can be, because you never know what is going to influence you or what's going to talk to you or where you go. You are both late teens, early 20s now.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, come on.
I'm much the other end of the spectrum on that. And I cannot believe the number of times I have said, I'm never going to listen to something like that. And then, 5 years later, that's the type of music that I'm listening to. And you just discover new music from as many eras as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter when you discover it, just always keep looking for new things. Follow that rabbit hole, because the music is, it can just speak to you, but it might not speak to you today. It might speak to you 5 years down the line.
Oh, that's great.
But
I love that.
Yeah.
Just be open to that.
That's so relevant. That's so relevant. And again, that's people talk about all the negatives of the streaming world, but that's one of the positives for me is like you can access something. You can access a playlist by just like typing a word into Spotify or Apple Music, and you can discover. Like I was talking about earlier with the Australian country. Yeah. Perfect example. I just saw it came up on my Apple Music. I just clicked it, and I've got 3 or 4 songs that I otherwise would never have heard of. So it's really important, especially from our artist perspective as well. When you get to discover, new artists that you kind of, aren't necessarily so mainstream, it can kind of lead you to different experiences, going and like, as I say, like doing gig swaps or helping each other out or, that kind of thing, creating those relationships with everybody, all around the world can lead to all sorts of cool stuff. Like I know that from experience. So that's a massive one. I absolutely love that.
Always approach everything with an open mind, and especially if you're a songwriter and if you're a producer, because you never know what's going to influence you in the future, like what's going to come back, what's going to stick like in the back of your mind, and then will influence that little beat that you go and produce, and or that little melody that you go and write. And so absolutely keeping an open mind is been the thing for us from day one as well.
Constantly educating yourself, even listening to a new song, you are educating yourself whether you realize it or not. You are, and to have that in the, as I say, in the background happening all the time, even if it's sort of like that passive learning kind of thing, it's so important.
Yeah, totally.
And just remember, "Boys of Summer" is the best song ever.
There we go. Well, Marcus, thank you so much again for being our very first guest. It's been an honor to have you as our very first guest on the Total Music Business podcast. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your advice with our audience. I'm sure this has been super valuable. And just before we wrap this up, a final reminder for our listeners that our brand new online course, The Modern Artist Pathway, is now live. And we are running a 50% off early bird discount to anyone who enrolls between now and June 30th, 2021. And it covers all aspects of being a professional artist, from setting up and successfully monetizing your business, to branding, to releasing your music, to personal and professional development, tips and tricks with legal and music industry advice too. So lots there for everyone. And for more info and to enroll, head to puzzlemakeracademy.thinkific.com. That's puzzlemakeracademy.thinkific. So THINKIFIC. So we'll put the link in the show notes, so you'll be able to grab it just there. And also don't forget to sign up to our mailing list, which goes out once a month and keeps you up to date with all the latest news from the worlds of the Puzzle Maker Academy and Puzzle Maker Studios, and gives you useful free bonus content as well. So thanks again for listening, and hit subscribe to get notified of future episodes. So take care. Thanks again, Marcus, and thanks, Danny.
Thank you very much. This has been, it's been awesome. Thank you, Marcus, for coming along, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, see you next time.